my main takeaway from the show was that if you are in a specific int, you kind of get your niche. Just understanding the availability of other types of information and technology and applications of how that information can be used is the real benefit. It just helps you understand how to communicate with your colleagues better, enhance and corroborate and confirm your intelligence. You're going to have to look outside of the OSINT sphere at some point to do that well.
Hello, I'm Aubrey Byron, producer on NeedleStack and your host for today.
And I'm Shannon Reagan, co-producer on NeedleStack and co-host today.
Today we are talking about GEOINT 2023, the symposium in St. Louis that we just got done attending for 3 days. We just wanted to give a little bit of recap and our thoughts and some new things we learned.
So this event is run by the United States Geospatial Intelligence Foundation. I know most of our listeners of the podcast are of the OSINT sphere, but OSINT, can be used in conjunction with any of the other INTs. That's what we've been doing these series of episodes on recently, specifically focusing on GeoINT. So it's just a lot of good conversations at the conference, good presentations, tons of vendors in the space. We learned a lot, and let's jump in.
Yeah, I mean, there were lots of great talks and panels, but I have to say one of the best parts about the conference was just walking around the expo room, getting demos from various companies.
Yeah, who knew we would miss the expo floor?
Yeah, people are doing really cool things out there, and it's neat to get to see.
I feel like I got better at being a guest, like a random person coming up to your booth, because I did want to preface, most of the time saying like, I'm not in the geospatial space. I'm more in the OSINT sphere. What is it that you do? What brings you here? Obviously, our company Authenticate, like a lot of our customers use, GeoINT as well as OSINT and many of the other INTs. So that's kind of our role there, was to understand the intersection of all of these. But the answers that I got out of what do you do just showed the wide world of this. I think the most interesting one I got was from Astera. I think I'm pronouncing that correctly. Forgive me if I'm wrong. But they do imaging, or like satellite radar imaging of water soil levels to detect like leaks and for uses in dams and mining and, water treatment and store facilities. It's just like, never knew you could do that from space. Look into the soil. They said they could tell like, fresh water from sewage and things like that. Just the world of GeoINT is very wide.
Yeah, absolutely. It was funny, actually, you say that, and I was getting a demo with some people, and we were in a truck, which I'll explain later. But he went around the room and asked everybody what they do, and every single person there had a different answer. There was a student, there was, an engineer, myself. I was like, I work on a podcast. But like, and then a data analyst, and it was just really kind of all over the board. And I think that's a really interesting intersection for who's attending these conferences and also how this technology can be used. One of the, I think some of the most interesting demos that I saw were from companies that are using SAR, which, if you don't know, is
synthetic aperture radar. We got a lot of acronym debriefs, so forgive us for
synthetic aperture radar. So, and what's interesting about that compared to optical is that you can see through clouds from the satellite. You can see at night. So a lot of times, sometimes when we're doing weapons monitoring, someone might hurry up and try to move, an aircraft carrier at night, or unveil it and move it. Something like that, because your typical imagery is not going to be able to capture that from a satellite or on a cloudy day. SAR can see all of that. And actually, you could see the metal sort of gleaming on some of these images. And then the various companies often do a little bit of work to, it's a little harder to tell, it takes a little more technical skills. And some of these companies are making it easier for a data analyst to just plug into what they're used to seeing. So
Yeah.
neat.
Yeah.
Got some great demos. It was like down to the meter, was what the guy at Capella said.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty fascinating stuff.
Yeah. Capella was, yeah, it was also an interesting booth. Black Sky was right around there as well. Good talk with them. Yeah. Similar problems in OSINT and GeoInt, like, what do you do with all of this data? Like, first of all, there's just a ton of it. So there are a lot of vendors there that were talking about like the data handling aspects, security of that data, cost effectiveness, of using cloud versus on-prem, like when those are appropriate. And then how do you bring it all together? How do you synthesize and analyze and then present it in a way that actually like means something, that is actionable? So same challenges, different acronym, but interesting to see the volume of vendors there just to deal with the data.
The truck that I mentioned
I was
was
going to say, why were you in a truck? I didn't see a truck today, but
oh really? Maybe the truck went back to California. It was a very large, like not armored vehicle, but a pretty giant
a
off
buff
the road.
vehicle.
Yes. And so the application was actually GeoInt and disaster relief, which we've
Mm-hmm.
touched on a little bit with Mark Knapp. But
Mm-hmm.
it was funny. We got in the truck and the guy's giving us a demo, and he's like, "This isn't actually really what we do, but we wanted to show off this cool truck
But
because
the
it's a
truck's
cool
cool. Yeah.
use of how you could use our product." But what they actually make, and this is a GDIT, that what they actually make are really small portable servers that are like half width, use low power, and they can be put together to make a mesh in perhaps a disaster relief area where a hurricane has taken out all comms. You can
Mm-hmm.
use this as a comms base, or behind enemy lines, I think is the actual
Yeah.
application that is happening most often for their
Just
product.
quietly drive this, tiny truck in there.
Well, but or like a small server that a stack. They had a stack in the truck, but he was saying like it. You can have some like briefcase size ones that then you put in various location, and then you have a lot of coverage. And I think he
Mm-hmm.
said 15 square kilometers was the coverage area when I asked of
Mm-hmm.
just one of them. So once you start piecing them together, it's
Mm-hmm.
quite a bit, and it also can provide cell service. So that was pretty interesting. And I feel like a lot of times, a lot of the booths I saw were more software side of
Mm-hmm.
things. So it was cool to see some hardware.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, there were some, satellite, companies with, models of their satellites there. Like, it's amazing just the availability of commercial satellites and the volume of commercial satellites now. And then it's, yeah, like, yeah, oh yeah, we'll, put another one up, no problem. We'll have 30 more next year or whatever. But yeah.
Or 3,000 if you're Starlink.
Oh my God. Yeah.
So I did get the Magic Leap demo. Did you do that?
I don't think I did Magic Leap today.
Okay, so it's a VR headset demo.
I saw them. Yes.
I had to wait for a very long time. It was a very popular booth. It turns out if you give people a game, they'll want to play.
Right.
But you can view satellites in real time in front of you as they are in space. We went through the different locations, so Leo, Meo, and Geo, of kind of where the placement is.
Mm-hmm.
And you could filter by company. So you can see out of all of the operable satellites, which I think was like 7,365, I think, of that's operable, which there's like 15,000 up there total, most of which don't work, as many of us know. There's just junk
Junk.
floating in
Yeah.
space. But yeah, a lot of them are Starlink and have launched in the last 3 years.
Yeah. I've seen the like exercises that they run when they all line up and they're, visible from the ground. Looks terrifying. Looks like we're under, alien invasion. My heart definitely skipped a beat before I knew what it was. Um, yeah, I think, like you were saying, that they're kind of putting in perspective like all that's out there. I think that was my main takeaway from the show, was that if you are in a specific int, you kind of get your niche. Just understanding the availability of other types of information and technology and applications, of how that information can be used, is the real benefit. It just helps you understand how to communicate with your colleagues better, enhance and corroborate and confirm your intelligence. You're going to have to look outside of the OSINT sphere, at some point, to do that well.
Absolutely. And there were tons more cool companies, by the way. I can't remember and name every single one off the top of my head, but people were very patient talking to us. But I also saw a lot of great panels.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how are the panels?
A lot talking about, I think one of the big headlines was red tape. A lot of these people are in government, and the problem sort of with how fast technology is moving and our nation moving at an ocean liner speed is those two things don't always go together. And people talking about how can we pivot? How can we sort of start moving faster, especially as technology advances and we're trying to keep up with other countries. And there were
Mm-hmm.
a lot of talks hit on that subject. The other big subject of the couple days that I saw, I think, was just recruiting.
Yeah.
The military and the government just aren't having as much success recruiting as they did 20 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a great quote, I think, from a former congressman that said, like, I don't care if you have a nose ring and tattoos. If you got a brain, we need you.
I want you. Yeah.
Talking about, yeah, a little bit of kind of getting out of old mindsets. And
Mm-hmm.
they talked about that. There was a panel on hiring for neurodiversity, kind of similarly, and thinking about like, we could really use neuroatypical people in this sphere, but they're getting weeded out in these interview processes. And I kind of I appreciated this one just because I feel like sometimes they're like, you need to do this, but don't actually provide any clues as to how.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they talked about is just if you're a neuroatypical person, you might have trouble with simple things like eye contact or being fidgety or even taking questions extremely literally. And that's just something to keep in mind in your interview process.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. A conversation we were having last night, this makes me think of these guys from GeoYeti that we were talking with, at our Putchak event. And they were kind of putting in perspective, in the intelligence community, post Cold War, it was sort of like, well, what do we do with ourselves? Like, what's the mission? And then 9/11 hit, and it was like, oh, like, we got to scale up like really quickly. And I think we've kind of been in that mindset that these, agencies have become really big and become very important. And so there's just more pressure to hire and kind of maintain the apparatuses that have been erected in the last few decades. And then with the explosion of OSINT, like this is in the last 15 years, how do you better use that? What type of people do you need assigned to that? Is it considered all source? Do you have a specific person or team dedicated to this, or agency dedicated to this? Yeah, there was somebody I talked to today, I think at Parsons, that said they had 700 open positions on their website. So if you're looking for a job, go look at Parsons.
Wow.
Yeah, that these things are just booming, and there's obviously a need for them. So great, great career path to get into.
Yeah, from the sound of it, quite a few of the agencies too are about to do a hiring blitz.
Yeah.
One of the other great panels that I saw, there was someone from the National Reconnaissance Office, and he said, I had to write down this quote. In kindergarten and first grade, it's space and dinosaurs. They eventually find out there's not much money in dinosaurs, but there is in space.
It's good. I'll keep that.
Yeah, there was some really good talks too, just talking about how we're going to modernize some of our capabilities. are we still building satellites the way we did in the 80s? And a lot of talks about
Mm-hmm.
how sort of commercial industries and government can come together to
Yeah.
uh, make some of these missions happen. And we're already starting to see that. I mean, that's definitely showcased within this symposium and how to do it some more.
Mm-hmm.
For on the local side of things, as probably a lot of people listening know or may not know, that the NGA is located in St. Louis, which is, you know, near and dear to Shannon and I. And he talked a lot about, you know, they're in the middle of building a new building on the north side, which is a
Mm-hmm.
traditionally underserved area, and kind of working with different nonprofits and programs to start getting people on the track to
Mm-hmm.
get into the Intel cycle. And he listed off a lot of interesting sounding programs. There was Unleashing Potential, K Career Inc., and they're going into high schools and kind of starting to talk to people about how to get into this career path. And then
Mm-hmm.
also offering scholarships and certificates. Later on, Tish Long announced a lot of scholarships that are happening. Some in particular that I was excited by, or particularly for first generation college students at a community college.
Mm-hmm.
There was one for trade school students and or someone attending continuing education programs. So not only offering these, but maybe finding them in places that aren't traditional four-year institutions that might be a little bit out of pocket for many people.
Yeah, out of reach. This was through NGA that they were recommending these scholarship and training programs?
Yeah. And they're through USGIF, and
Mm-hmm.
they had various company sponsors. I know AWS was one. I can't remember all of the other sponsors, but great
But
job
God
for
bless them. Yeah.
them.
Yeah. Um, yeah, there seems to be a huge effort to create that pipeline, even if it's going to take, 5 to 10 years to come to fruition. The focus is already there.
But yeah, it's great that they're forward thinking.
Yeah. And I think, part of the way that it seems like they're working to engage people that might not have been interested in GeoInt or, in our sphere in OSINT, for that matter, in the more maybe traditional fields of applications in like military and intelligence agency missions, the stuff that it seems like they're trying to broaden the horizon with, on the generation that's coming in, and the stuff that I think both you and I like just find fascinating, again, of how wide this world is, or maybe the softer applications of something like GeoInt. I talk to people about how GeoInt is used in shipping, whether that be maritime shipping or ground and logistics. Like, when are my trucks going to get there? Is there going to be enough space for all of them in this parking lot at once? Like, just figuring out where to put stuff uses GeoInt. They were talking about insurance companies that use it to understand like where floodplains are, and are floodplains changing? Like, are those moving, and the areas that would have been considered that one year, is that changing the next, or in 5 years? What are those projections? Being a former California resident, seeing how they understand wildfires, both from like a forestry service perspective, and again, insurance or utilities. Where are you building substations? Where are you putting these transformers? What does the risk of that look like? In wildfire season, which is beyond even a season now. There were a couple other ones that I thought, again, I just never heard of before. Tracking poaching in national preserves in Africa,
Oh, that's
and
fascinating.
I know, and illegal fishing as well, kind of beyond national fishing boundaries. And then one of the innovation talks that I went to, these were like 5-minute talks, rapid fire, by lots of different organizations at the Innovation Hub. Was from NREL on the success rate, essentially, of renewable energy. It's like there's all these countries that have made these promises and projections of moving to renewables, but how is that actually going? And using satellite imagery and GeoInt to look at, scale of wind turbines, how many, what is the placement and number of solar panels, and like how is that affecting the grid, and is this actually going to meet the projections? So looking at the scale of renewables, through the lens of GeoInt. Again, never would have thought until I popped into this talk.
Yeah, one of the panels they also touched on using GeoInt in agriculture
Oh
because
yeah.
the former director of NASA was talking about from their space station, they can see if plants are in distress,
Mm-hmm.
um, and kind of look at early sort of intervention there.
Mm-hmm.
And I have a friend who's an ecologist and was just talking about, using drones for conservation,
Mm-hmm.
being able to tell if there's invasive species moving in without someone physically on the ground there.
Yeah. Yeah. Climate and weather were baked into this, throughout, in terms of using GeoInt to understand climate and climate change. And then also kind of bypassing the weather, in certain like SAR, satellites that, can see through the clouds and see at night and stuff like that. How limiting that used to be when it's like, sorry, your, target was, it was rainy that day. So you don't see anything.
One quote from that same panel that I thought was interesting because budget constraints and the economy were a big focus, and that was one of the panels that I attended. And a great quote from one of them was, and I don't remember which, sorry. When money gets cut, they don't innovate, they go back to how they used to operate. And I thought
Mm,
that was a really interesting note, because
mm-hmm.
and I find that to be true, actually. Yeah, you need a little bit of room in the budget if you're going to try something new, or else you kind of have to stick to bare bones.
Yeah. Yeah. And time is money too. Like it takes time for people to scale up on new technologies or new ways of doing things. That innovation is great, but it takes commitment either in time or dollars or both.
Yeah, absolutely. I also attended one of the training sessions, and I have to say it was a little bit underwhelming.
Oh, no. We won't say
It,
which one.
yeah, no. But I hope that it was just that particular one, but yeah, could have found it on YouTube.
Okay, cool. Yeah, actually, I was going to ask, random takeaways from the conference. My favorite thing was someone reading a very crowded PowerPoint slide like this. Sorry, this is just my notebook. Like reading it line by line. Sorry, you probably can't hear my microphone. Reading it line by line, holding something up in front of their face so that they could just like read it slowly. But I was like, what a life hack! Like, never seen this before in my life. These people are geniuses here.
Oh. Reading a
But
PowerPoint line by line is maybe
I was going to
my
say,
biggest pet peeve.
hot tip is really fewer words on your PowerPoint slides, but it was still
Yeah.
a good talk. So worth the read. Also, my confession is so much for geospatial intelligence. Not once, but twice. I was on my phone walking in downtown St. Louis and walked up to the doors of the dome. I was like, why can't I get in? Because it's not the convention center, which is a block away. I did it in the morning and then I did it like coming back in like in the afternoon. They
That's
would be
funny.
so ashamed of me. They're like, can we get you a satellite perhaps?
Oh yeah, there was a really great talk that kind of talked about, you know, everybody's trying to get satellites up in the air, but they
Mm-hmm.
forget about the ground game, and there
Mm-hmm.
are more points. So, sometimes they get it up, but they don't have the control mechanism to operate from the ground.
And looking at all of the satellite imagery too, that from the OSINT world, it's the other perspective. It's GeoInt is mostly satellite fueled, looking at physical features on the ground or events happening on the ground. OSINT is looking at the same thing but from a different perspective, and so I think they dovetail so nicely. Actually, I went up to the Esri booth. What a bunch of gems working at the Esri booth today. Um, just immediately when they heard I was in OSINT, they're like, "Do you know you can map OSINT information?" They're like, "If something has a location and a time, like." long lat information, like you can pop that in, some geospatial platform and really understand like where are we looking, when are we looking. That talking about GeoInt as a way to bring together anything with location data. It's like that's really interesting. Never thought of it before.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think there was definitely some buzzwords that got thrown around a lot. Hyperspectral was one. Resiliency on the industry side was a big one.
Yeah.
There was one more good quote from a former congressman talking about working between government and industry, and he said, "We need to do more than write checks or buy things from your catalogs." Which just talking about, industry needs to innovate, but government needs to be innovating with them.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of shelfware, in agencies. There's a lot of money. There's a lot of turnover. That it is, the challenges are understandable as to why things get bought the way that they do. But I think everybody wants to be more thoughtful in the dollars that are spent and the way that these solutions are actually deployed and actually used. So in a better world, sure.
They also talk about in that partnership, another important part that doesn't get, maybe as much attention is including academia. If you think of some of our best technologies out there right now, a lot of them
Mm-hmm.
were started in laboratories
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
on a college campus.
Yeah. The university systems, God bless.
Well, it was a great 3 days, our first time at GeoInt.
But not our last.
And yeah, I am excited to see more of these technologies and use.
Mm-hmm.
You can check out the agenda on USGIF's website if you're interested in who was speaking, what they talked about. Highly recommend it.
Yeah, it's a great event. We learned a lot, and I think again would highly recommend for any OSINTers out there that might be dabbling in GeoInt, to either attend the conference or, yeah, like you said, to check out the speakers and just kind of see what else is out there.
Well, thanks for joining us today. If you liked what you heard, you can view transcripts and other episode info on our website, authenticate.com/NeedleStack. That's authentic with the number 8.com/NeedleStack. I got a lot of confusion on that today and yesterday, so make
Just
sure
to
you get the
clarify.
T in there. Somehow it gets missing sometimes. Um, Be sure to let us know what you thought on Twitter at NeedleStackPod, and to like and subscribe wherever you're listening today. We'll be back next week with more on geolocation. We'll see you then.
All right, see you then.